Hey everyone, this is Anna Runyon, and you are listening to the Classy Career Goal podcast. Today's podcast episode is sponsored by the Iowa Economic Development Authority. And today I'm really excited to introduce our guest, Mary Beth Hart. She is the Director of Community and Diversity Relations at Hy-Vee. And in today's episode, it's going to be a little different because we're going to go behind the scenes into Mary Beth's journey from where she started and where she is today. And she's going to share her advice and tips. And we're also going to contrast growing your career in a city like Washington, D.C., or a rural area like Iowa. Throughout your career, you are going to have big decisions like, should I take this new job? Should I take this move, this change of location? How can I grow and get more involved in giving back to my community? And most importantly, what are the best financial choices I can make to reach my financial goals as well? So we want to prepare you for those big decisions that are coming. And today on the podcast, Mary Beth is going to share her networking tips and practical steps to landing a new job in a different city. You're going to learn how to use professional organizations and what you should know before you make a big career change. I'm so excited for you to hear this episode. If you're considering making a big career change or even making a big move in your location, you are going to love this episode. So let's dive in. Welcome, Mary Beth, to the Classy Career Goal podcast. We are so excited to have you here today.
Hi, Anna. Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So our audience loves taking a peek behind the scenes of other people's career journeys, kind of understanding how they got to where they are today. So let's start with that. Let's start with your career journey, where you started and what you do today.
Sure thing. So I am originally from Iowa. I grew up in Ankeny, which is the suburb of Des Moines, just north of Des Moines. Went to Ankeny High School, graduated and headed north to the College of St. Benedict up in Minnesota. Spent 4 years there, loved it, had lots of opportunities to travel and see the world. Came back home after I graduated and then started a job in government relations for Pioneer Hybrid, which is now Corteva Agrisciences. And they at the time were owned by DuPont. And that job was in government relations. Like I said, I loved that job, had great exposure, great first job out of college, really lucky and privileged to land it. And then DuPont moved me to Washington, D.C. So I spent another few years, I think it was maybe 4 years with DuPont there in DC doing government relations, state policy, dabbling a little bit in federal policy, working in advocacy and doing a lot with our grassroots for DuPont. I had what I call my quarter life crisis when I decided that I wanted to pursue a different career. So I went and got my master's degree in education and worked at American University for a while, at Marymount University, before I just rediscovered my interest in government relations. So then I went back and started working in advocacy for an organization called BIPAC. Had a wonderful opportunity to really build a network, both in DC and then with BIPAC with state organizations who, the state Chamber of Commerce or the state business association. And that is really what got me back to Iowa, was the conversations with the Iowa Association of Business and Industry. BIPAC was working closely with them, and I discovered, that I was ready to come home in my conversations with Iowa ABI, and found an opportunity in Des Moines that brought me home to Iowa about 5 years ago. So my career has been great because I've been able to take advantage of opportunities, identify next steps and act on them, and have had the real privilege of working in lots of different environments and organizations of all types and sizes. So that's kind of it's an overview of me and my career and how I landed back in Iowa.
I love that. And I love how you said you had your quarter life crisis. You kind of re-examined your interest too, because that's a lot of our audience is going through some sort of career change, re-examining their purpose, their interests. So it's inspiring to hear your journey and that you went through that as well. So I would love to know like more about the difference between like working in DC and working in Iowa. What were kind of like the factors that drove you to move back? And then what was your career in networking like in DC versus Iowa?
Yeah, so the biggest factor that drove me to move back to Iowa was an opportunity that was just too good to turn down here with Hy-Vee and our government relations was the job that I moved home for. But then the other thing that was also in my ear is I was ready to come home, and there were things that I wanted in my life that I knew that where I was at in DC, I probably wouldn't be able to achieve in the timeline and the time frame that I had hoped for. So, I had wanted to be able to be a homeowner. I wanted a yard. I wanted a dog. I wanted things that I just knew that in DC, while I was being paid really well, it just was out of my reach because of the cost of living there. So that was a big factor. And then to be close to my family. My family and friends were still here in Iowa. I had a wonderful network in DC. And there's I say networking is networking no matter where you are. But here at home, I was ready to be closer to my family and my friends who just weren't out in DC. Your question about the networking, maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
So
we love talking about networking here. So let's
yeah,
dive in.
networking is networking. That's my perspective. I think the difference in DC networking and Iowa is really the audience and who you're interacting with. Where in DC, I was in my 20s, early 30s. A lot of other young professionals were out and about networking and meeting people. It's really a part of the city's culture and its core. So much of what happens in our nation's capital is decided by young professionals, you know, off of the hill. So when you're not necessarily, at work, it's about the relationships and the connections that you can make outside of work. And here in Des Moines, I think that's true as well. Networking and what's going on here is very similar. I would say that there is a more a familial connection here in Des Moines in Iowa, where, and this could just be because when I was in DC, I was a young professional. I didn't have my own family. I wasn't married. Just a different lifestyle. But here in Des Moines, the networking that I've seen is very similar to DC, but just there's a little bit more opportunity to bring your family around and bring your friends along, and it's a little more Midwestern is probably the best way to put it. But networking is networking, and the skills that it takes to get out there and meet people, are very similar.
Awesome. And I love that you chose you reevaluated like your values, what was important to you, your priorities. Cause I think a lot of times our career takes a hold of us and like we have no time and we're just trying to get to that next level. And so I love that you're setting the example for everyone to just kind of like take a second, reevaluate what your values are, what your priorities are when you make those like huge career and life decisions that you made. So talking about networking, you were mentioning before we started recording about some professional organizations and how you've used professional organizations to expand your network as well. So share that with us too, because that's something I feel like, at least with the pandemic, I feel like we've kind of grown away from, and hopefully those will continue and expand more. So share with us if people have not gotten involved with their professional organization, what have you found of value for doing that?
Sure. So even though I grew up here in Iowa, when I moved back, my professional network was very limited in scope because I had been away for so long. Being away for almost 10 years meant that the world kept on spinning here. And there were a few people that I had kept in touch with and that I felt confident enough to reach out and reconnect with when I moved back. But Really, it was as if coming to a place that I hadn't been before, and I needed to reestablish. So for me, I looked at my passion areas and what I was interested in, and that's community involvement, giving back, leadership development. And I found a real connection here in Des Moines with opportunities from organizations like the Greater Des Moines Partnership. They have a plethora of professional development committees and opportunities that they offer to entrepreneurs and job seekers, uh, professionals here in town. You know, the other ones that I was lucky enough to get connected with fairly early on were, like I had mentioned before, was the Iowa Association of Business and Industry. So that group of professionals was really helpful with the work that I was doing and, you know, my day-to-day job tasks. So I could rely on them a lot to help steer me to who I needed to know. Then the third one I'll mention is the Greater Des Moines Leadership Institute. And they have, as a part of their programming, a leadership program for professionals to get to know Des Moines and get to know Des Moines in a way beyond just looking at the map or talking to, you know, your next door neighbor. It provided an opportunity for me to learn more about Des Moines' natural resources, the city's overall economic development plan, where and what were we doing around transportation and infrastructure. So that organization and the community leadership program really helped me take a deep dive into the community that I had just moved back to. And in the process, I was able to meet, you know, a couple, let's see, a couple dozen young professionals actually of all ages and backgrounds that were also learning how and what was going on in Des Moines so we could have a positive influence on where the city is going in the future. So those, you know, that organization was really neat because I got to meet new people and then I got to explore and learn about the city that I, you know, grew up in nearby. And see where it was today. So that was a really great opportunity for me.
Yeah, it's like you're giving back to that city that you live in, where you grew up with too. So you feel like you've been able to get involved, volunteer in the community. Is there a difference when it comes to like from DC to Iowa as far as like community involvement, you think?
Oh, for me, absolutely. So in DC, I had always intended to get involved in the community. But at the end of the day, my work-life balance and the demands of what I needed to do at work kind of held me back. And I'll be honest, there were a couple opportunities where I volunteered in DC, but I just didn't feel that connection that I feel here now that I'm home in the Des Moines area. I'm serving on a board of a local nonprofit, which has just been very fulfilling for me and for my family to be able to know that I can give back in that way and I have the time to do it. My employer encourages that kind of community involvement. So, you know, there's a definite difference between community involvement for me, community involvement, giving back in DC than there is here in Des Moines.
That's so interesting. And you mentioned like work-life balance too, because that's something, it's a hot topic as well in this podcast. Like, have you, and you mentioned it was different. So how is the work-life balance different from, you know, when you were at your prior job to now where you're at in Iowa?
I think there's different priorities placed on different things because DC is very different than Des Moines and the culture, you know, that I've lived in both cities is just very different. Uh, in DC, there is a priority of working. You know, you've got in the role that I was in, there usually had a work breakfast. You worked all day, and then there was an event after work, a happy hour or a reception where you were networking and meeting people, and you know, talking about the public policy issue of the day. Here in Des Moines, I feel like there is a bit of a different work-life balance where, you know, a lot of what I do is more family oriented, more uh, around I don't want to say the person as a whole, because in DC, what I was doing was it was great. I loved it. It just was a different phase in my life. I'll say that, a different phase where now I come home and I'm, you know, I have a dog, I've got a husband now, so I'm able to spend more time with them, and I'm able my priorities have shifted a bit. So giving back and being in community, being involved in this community is a more natural fit for me.
So how is like hiring, like where you live, you know, with your current company too? Are the companies hiring? And like, what if someone was like wanting to move to, you know, a different city? They didn't have a job there. They wanted to get a new job. They're interested in the lower cost of living, right? In Iowa. Like, what would be your tips to someone who wants to explore that route?
So my current company is hiring. I think
Which is what?
which is, you know, most folks in our sector are looking for people. There's a lot of opportunity here in Iowa. I think like anywhere you go, it is a matter of who you know and the skills and the resources that you bring. I would say that there is an increased effort among Iowa employers to try and bring in outside voices, people who have experience with you know, in different places or different industries. So it's very encouraging for those who are considering moving here from somewhere else. I think that the job market here is constantly in flux, just like it is anywhere else. The cost of living is a huge draw, and it can make you know, job opportunities seem more attainable, or goals and what you want to accomplish in your job seem more attainable, because you'll be able to give more time, or have more resources available to go out and network and to meet people. So I think, you know, it's promising. I say use your network, figure out who on LinkedIn is working for the company that you want to work for, and make that connection, search to see what's going on in Iowa. Check out the partnerships website, the Des Moines Partnership, and I would say check out Catch Des Moines to learn about the community and the culture here and what's going on with events and other things like that. So.
Awesome. And the other thing too, because we talked a lot about the cost of living, like what has there been anything specifically that you think has contributed to, you know, more financial stability or your career success when it comes to moving back to Iowa as well?
Yeah, the housing market here is much more reasonable. You know, the example I can give is my last apartment in DC was a studio apartment in a great area, really close to the metro. It was a really nice place. I will add that. It was $1,800 a month for a studio. And now that I'm back home, you know, that is equivalent to about what a mortgage could be for a single family home. So right. It is this finding the balance in what I wanted in my life, what phase I was at. And then I decided to make the leap and come home and be able to afford a nice house and to get the goals and the things that I wanted that just seemed like were out of reach in DC became attainable here in Des Moines.
That must be feel good too, like, you know, fulfilling, because we're all about like a fulfilling career and life here, more fulfillment, you know, probably less stress, I would imagine, because you're not just like trying to make more to be able to afford your lifestyle, you know?
Yeah. There is less stress. It can be, there's a different kind of stress sometimes.
Yeah. What's that?
It's like, yeah, it's it's good. It's all around good, and it was right for me at the time.
Awesome. So what would be your final words of wisdom to someone who's, just getting started in their career, trying to figure out where they should live, where they should work? I feel like there's so much opportunity available to, people who are starting out or even like considering a midlife career change too.
Yeah.
What would
Yeah.
be your words of wisdom for someone who's going through that right now?
Give it a try. I have in my career, in my personal life, like if an opportunity has presented itself, and I usually think through things. I'm a very thoughtful person. I have my pros and cons lists, and I figure it out. But generally, I've taken the leap and I've given things a try. And then if I realize a few years or months down the road that it wasn't the right thing, then I'm not afraid to make the change. So, so many examples with that. My quarter life crisis, going to get a master's degree and something completely different than what I'm doing now. Like, I don't regret that because now I know that it wasn't what I was meant to be doing. Um, Moving to DC, I was there for 9, almost 10 wonderful years. And I'm
Wow.
so grateful that I did it. And had I not gone out there, then I don't know that I would feel as fulfilled now where I am. So my advice is give it a try and, take the risk. And then if you need to go back and go back to where you were, or make another adjustment or take a different fork in the road, so be it. I think that is really one way that you can have that fulfilling life and know that you've done what you can, to be happy.
I love that. Yeah, you can always try new things. And I think that's like a perfect, like, give it a try, take a risk, learn from it, try new things. We don't have to like stay in the same career forever, right?
Right.
So thank you so much, Mary Beth. This was a great conversation. I think it's going to be helpful and inspiring to a lot of our listeners today. So thank you so much for being here.
Good. Thanks so much, Anna.
You're welcome.